Hello and welcome to Making the Rounds. We're probably not going to be talking about the current hot topic social issue this week, but we are going to talk about video gaming that has occurred because we love video gaming. Have you been doing, like, before we get started, have you been doing any of your own personal video gaming lately, Emily Rand?
Out of League of Legends, no. This week is weird though because we're going we have such a condensed schedule as well. So it's also the first week that we are not going to be on live patch, which is kind of sad. I was kind of hoping they just.
I don't know why.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping they would just force the pros to be on 14-13, and I know. I assume I actually don't know this, but what I assume happened is that Mark probably and like comp ops talked to teams and they were like, "What do you want to do?" Because since we're Thursday, Friday, they would have
Yeah, I mean that makes
theoretically less than 24 hours. Obviously, I'm pretty sure they have accounts that have access to the patch before potentially, but
not no.
depends. They wouldn't have like PBE accounts.
They wouldn't. Oh, PvE accounts, maybe. That's like a really kind of case by case cases because they sort of stopped giving those out.
Oh, okay.
So if you're an older pro, you'd have a clear advantage. Let's put it that way.
Dig season.
Dig season.
No. Okay, we'll get to that later. But yeah, it's we're still on 14-12, so a lot of the it's one of those really weird things where if you're gaming and trying to pay attention, you have to block off what's on the current patch. So a lot of the AP, basically instead of nerfing Faded Ashes, they just nerf a lot of the AP junglers. But we are still going to be on the patch with the broken AP junglers who are all using Faded Ashes. So, I mean, I've been having a fun time in this current meta. So, I was curious to see what 14-13 would change, but then we're going to have an extended break. So
great. We're on patch delay.
I'll be going home, where I will play League of Legends better. I think I get better ping in Boston.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
I do. Let's go. I'll start my climb.
Yeah. So basically, we're not on the weekends. We're not on live patch. Is there gonna be a walkout for old time's sake? You know, just
wish. Let me. Yeah, I know, right? Hit every single
just reminder of last summer. I'm down.
Yeah. The good kind of walkout, the stage walkouts. Maybe we could get players to do that. They will never.
Oh,
even a lot of the LPL,
LPL walkouts.
Yeah, even a lot of the LPL teams have stopped.
Shout out to UCal though, by the way. He still does the walkouts, and I have never seen someone so happy to win a single game of LPL in my entire life. That was crazy, man. That guy who's losing it. God bless UCal. UCal, I think, made a lot of new fans this week.
I'm a UCal fan from the old KT lineup that I watched Heartbroken lose. I'm sure we'll get to how sad I am about KT.
We do have that on the agenda, but
excited.
Yeah, as a literal, I've been playing Final Fantasy V.
Oh, nice.
Because June to August is 4-Job Fiesta season. I don't know if you're familiar with 4-Job Fiesta.
I'm not.
But it's a challenge run for charity. I will shill the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund because that's the charity this year. I never get to do it because I'm always coaching or doing something in season. But you are challenged to complete the game with a set of randomly generated 4 jobs. So it's actually very fun because every game is different. Anyway, good times, good video gaming, enjoyable. Let's talk about League of Legends now. Hooray. So Speaking of LPL and those things, is Milkyway a one split wonder? You know, is that where we are with FPX at the moment?
Think so. I don't think he will be. I know FPX have had a tough time. I was reviewing their series against JDG right before this. I actually think they were in a really winnable position in the Diana game, as weird as that sounds. Because I feel like people are down on Diana maybe generally compared to some of the other AP junglers, just because of the way she plays. But I definitely think they've had... It's weird because I thought... So there are a lot of things going on, right? Obviously, behind the scenes stuff. I think if mental and presumably their practice and prep hadn't been as bad as it was, presumably going into that EDG series, I think they probably would have taken that series, and then they equalized against EDG later. Lost to JDG, which is kind of expected, but I did think they were in winnable positions, and like, again, looking better than that EDG series for sure in the last series they had against JDG, despite the loss. Some of that was like the incredible Clowny level 1 in game 2 that gave Diana 2 kills.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think things aren't as dire for FPX as it might seem, due to the fact that in their group, I'm pretty sure all they have to do is rely on JDG to beat EDG, which is likely to happen. It's not guaranteed, but it is likely. I think JDG obviously still have some holes in their gameplay that I thought were visible in the FPX series, actually. But and then so there's that, and then all they have to do is beat TT, right? So I think they're
on a tear. He's
ready. They're in a winnable position. It's UCal versus Care. Who will win? But I also, I know, right? This is where we come to. But I also think that it's been interesting for me, and I want to hear.
Anyway.
I want to hear your opinion on this, because I was fully expecting like this current meta for them to look really good, right? Because like we look at teams that have kind of taken to this meta really well. I think like Tamwon is one of them, where Lucid, who I wanted to play carries for a while, has gone into this split, looked really, really comfortable. They've looked super comfortable with this style. Gen G, it's almost criminal how they were already the best team in the world, and then the meta just got better for them. And I think a lot of LPL carry junglers are like super happy with the meta, and I was expecting Milkyway to be one of them, but they do seem to have struggled a little bit more with the what?
Oh, I did the stupid thing where I tapped out and your cam went away. Continue.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I was gonna say, what happened? Because I can't see myself. Yeah. Or I can see myself, but I can only see myself, not the stream. The swap from like when they were doing like Kindred with Annie mid, right, and playing AD jungler with AP mid, they haven't seemed nearly as successful with AD mid, AP jungle. And that kind of makes me sad, and I'm not really sure why that is, because I would have expected, and I don't think all of it can be blamed on Care. But I think can't. Like so yeah. So I think like, again, there were some bright moments from them in the JDG series. The Shallow who solo kill onto Flandre made me laugh.
Yeah.
I love Flandre so much. Anyway. But yeah, I mean, I don't think Milkyway is actually going to end up being a one split wonder. I think FPX have shown some flashes of like good play. Even in their O2 loss to JDG. I'm curious to see what you think though about the transition from AD jungle AP mid to AP jungle AD mid. and why FPX seemed to be having a worse time with one than the other.
So I've kind of maintained this pretty consistently, is that like FPX, the value of FPX was like their drafts were terrible. A lot of times their game plans were not even good, and they would just win off of like some magic comeback fight, right? And that's literally why Milkyway was so exciting, is because he would just outplay these unwinnable situations. The problem is that you still kind of have that placement and have that kind of identity. And I think their drafts were a little bit better this past week, but you still kind of have that identity of our drafts are still bad. Our coordination is still whatever. But the problem is kind of twofold. One is that the champions that are currently meta are not so comfort that you can just 1v9 clutch out these kind of fight situations. Yeah. And two, you're not getting like the bot lane advantages for free that you got because of the existence of Rumble supports. Like, I think that is a
really good point.
A really underrated aspect of FPX's success last split was the Rumble supports, because they were playing it far more than everyone else. Before it was kind of getting picked away, before it was getting banned against them, and before they were getting swapped against in the one game against NIP, right? But that was like a huge part of their success, is that they could literally just get free kills and bots, and a lot of times Milkyway would benefit from this. And then people realized, oh, this champ's actually pretty OP in the support role, and they banned it, and then plus it got changed, so it's like no longer too functional. So they're struggling again. I think we did see like the Ashe game still gives them kind of that identity, and Ashe is frequently banned against them, but it's hard for them. And I think what's interesting to me is that they seem to think Kindred is not good right now, because there have been multiple times where it is open and it's potentially pickable, but they don't go for it, whereas they would have like first picked it last split, right? And I do think part of that is because there is so much poke, and Kindred kind of like hates playing against poke, but I don't know, man. Meteor made it work. Meteor is a god.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was wondering if it's just clear speed. Like if he feels like it's, but then they played the Lilia into that JDG comp in game 1, and I thought that was not.
No, that was a terrible Lilia.
I felt like she was gonna get owned, and she did. Yeah. So yeah, but I'm not really sure what their read on it is, to be honest.
Yeah, because my stream kind of made fun of me because I was saying that the Kindred pick was terrible in like the LGD series. And it is for the reason that in the LGDWE series, and it is for the reason effectively that let me see if I can find the exact draft. Oh, why am I looking at the wrong? Okay. It is because it was against Nidalee, Corki, Ezreal, and it's like if you get hit by one projectile, right, you have to burn ult and then you die after that. But the weird thing was is that they were just like all winning the Kindred, like running at him, and he got free ults, and they turned a lot of fights from that. So yeah, it's definitely one of those circumstances where it's like, I think maybe because they've gotten burned by first picking Kindred in the past, like specifically by BLG with like the TF composition and everything else they were doing, that they're getting off the Kindred, and most one tricks are less likely to pick their champs in metas where their champs don't do well, because there are so many counters. So just because they're more familiar with and they understand their champion better. So we'll see what happens with FPX, but I think that basically they're sort of out of tricks at the moment. That doesn't necessarily mean that Milkyway is a one-split wonder. It means that he has a limited effective champ pool, which is not shocking. Like, he's a rookie. And I think that will change over time. And if FPX had more resources, had more opportunities than literally just hard win bot lane and hope we 1v9 in the base, then we would be able to see a lot better performances from them. So we'll see.
I think it isn't, again, if everything goes according to like how it quote unquote should, which isn't guaranteed, but they will still make like the good group for the next stage. Essentially, if JDG beat EDG and then they beat TT.
I believe in you, Cal. No, I don't. But
you believe in you, Cal? But he'll be really happy if they win.
It's hard not to be happy for him, you know? It's a good time.
Yeah. I mean, that series could end up being a real sloppy game. It'll be fun. It'll be a fun time. But I think there's still a pretty good chance that they make the top group, and then we'll see, because then they'll just have more chances. If only because I do expect JDG to beat EDG. But we'll see.
I mean, yeah, we'll see. There's
nothing guaranteed in LPL. I've seen so many series.
No undefeated teams left, at least in single games. There's no undefeated teams left.
Yeah.
So, we had TES fall this week.
They did. That's why I'm wearing my Toppies.
Yeah, Emily decided we haven't glazed TES enough lately. So
True.
Even though we're not going to talk about them, she's going to wear the TES.
We're not talking about them at all. It's because I'm going. It's because I'm going to the gym after this, actually, and that's where I wear my esports merch too.
This is how you express your disappointment in TES: is you make their jersey smell bad. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But what we will talk about. Wait, okay, this is like slightly not in the order I want, but we'll talk about LCS topics first. Maybe? No. I sent you a different order than this, I think.
Other order, where we did start with Milkyway and then we were going to go into SK.
Yeah.
And
okay, so the way I wanted to structure this is we talk about Milkyway and then we talk about LEC and then we talk about LCK and then we finish with LCS. All right.
This is the most cursed. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's go.
Okay. So yeah, basically, a lot of people are really excited about SK's bot lane. I think that's like the one we addressed it briefly before. You said that you had previously been relatively high on Rahel, right?
So for people that don't know, he came from the same DK Challengers team that Thanatos came from. It was essentially like people were looking at this team of Thanatos, Lucid, Hulbei, who's another player who kind of dropped off, and then Rahel as a unit that was very good together, but also just very, very good individual players, right? Just how Lucid got promoted. That's why Thanatos was such a hyped prospect when C9 was picking him up, and then it's why, like, I know people's reaction to Rahel was like split, because a lot of people wanted an EMEA player promoted from like ERLs, potentially, but for people who had seen Rahel play, I think there is a general sense of like, oh, this guy is actually so.
Yeah, I think like when people have gone the other way and said the fact that Rahel's doing well is a big condemnation of LEC players, but I don't think that's necessarily true. I think Rahel like had a lot of decent teamfight performances domestically when I did go back and watch his games. The other element I did want to ask you about Luan though. Like, do you feel as strongly about his performances being good? Because I actually feel like going into the split, more people were high on Luan than Rahel. So
interesting to me. I wasn't as high on him. I think he's performed pretty well. There have been some. It's been interesting to see how the meta has also shifted from the time that he was on Nongshim, like challengers. Nongshim is such a weird org too, because they seem to find like a lot of talent, but then are unable
to NS, actually. Anyway.
no, like their scouting, in my opinion, is actually like really good. And then they're unfortunately never able to make a ton of noise with those same players in LCK a lot of the time. It makes them kind of a fun team to watch always, though. So, but yeah, I'll say I probably was less high on him than others. But I think he and Rahel have been working pretty well together. And I think, like, there are times where I love Luan. Like, I'm thinking of, is it in the MDK series where Luan just, like, goes in on, was it Merwin? It was, like, in the MDK base.
Yeah.
And Rahel immediately follows up, even though, like, the rest of them had already just like peeled off, and just the two of them are going in, and I'm like, okay, like this is fun. You guys are fun. Like,
yeah.
And they actually managed to get, like, the team ends up coming in. I think Niski ends up coming in through mid. And there was such an aggressive play when they're already in a really winning position. They actually end up getting top inhib off of it because the team does come in. Specifically, Niski's Trist, I believe, comes in. But yeah, they've worked really well together. I've liked how kind of aggressive they've been in picking some of their fights and how much they seem to be like feeling themselves. I feel like I was higher on Rahel than Luan, so it's been cool to see him have these kind of like neat pop-off moments for the team.
I'm actually still not like as sold on Luan. I think Rahel's actually performed pretty well. I think that a lot of space creation for SK's fights is happening from like Niski like disengaging and like repositioning the fights, playing things like Azir Tristana, and then I think Isma takes space pretty well as well. So I think like they've been like super underrated in terms of how the fights have gone. And Luan's engages, I feel like a lot of times either shouldn't work out that well. But like I do think
fun.
Yeah, I do think Rahel has performed well, and the team is like very good at covering for kind of some of the issues. I don't necessarily think this means that like the solution should just be get a full KR bot lane, which is kind of like the impetus for this topic, I think, originally. That's like unfortunately been the controversy, which makes me a little unhappy because I feel like every time LCK players do well, or like not LCK but LCK CL players do well, everyone's like, oh, just get Koreans, and that should not be the takeaway. I think the takeaway should be that great, like Rahel's performing really well in fights, and right now I feel like LEC is almost entirely dictated by team fighting. Like I'm really trying. I'm being very patient watching these games, but it is literally like if you can make a team fight work, good. And so I think Rahel is popping off in that context, and he's been very fun to watch. I think the fact that like it feels like SK is very no ego and they all go in together has been very fun to watch, and I think that's part of why they're doing so well. So yeah,
they've picked some fun comps too, which has been cool. Like some really fun team fighting comps. I dislike when anything is oversimplified and it means that you neglect your actual scouting. Because if I was actually scouting, I would have taken a look at Rahel because, again, like I said, he was really good on DK in their challenger system on a team where people were looking at like all of these players, like I said. And the one that they promoted internally was Lucid, but then you have, again, Thanatos had the weird, like, he was off the radar for a bit.
yeah.
And there was some controversy around that, which I'm not going to go over or get into. But when he came to C9, there was a reason why people were looking at him on DK and being like, oh, wow, this team was really good and he's really good. And I feel like you could have similarly looked at the way that Rahel worked on that team and thought like, hey, this player is going to end up being really good. I think it's always a combination of like actually scouting the player and what they're good at. Are they going to fit into your system with your players? Are you going to take the time to actually consider like their temperament and where they're going to fit and the teammates you're putting around them? Not only how they work in game, but also like just going to a different country where even if you are fluent in English, English is not going to be your first language. And it's also potentially not going to be the first language of your teammates either. And yeah, just stuff like that and counterbalancing that against other players that you're scouting. I feel like a lot of the times people are just like, the academy system in Korea and the trainee system in Korea is the best. Ergo, we will just pluck this player and they will already know a lot of things in game that someone maybe from our region won't. And while that could potentially be true, I dislike how it becomes a shortcut then for not actually doing more scouting due diligence.
Yeah.
And that's my opinion on it. Like, I am happy that both Rahel and Luan are doing really well. Like I said, I was higher on Rahel coming in because I thought he had better performances in challengers. And I am really happy that SK is doing well. I know people like flip-flop on Niski a lot as a player. But I feel like on this podcast, we have been Niski enjoyers. And I continue to be in terms of like what he can do internally on a team and the way that he sees the game, I think is very intelligent. So yeah, I mean, I think it's cool to see SK do well. I think it's cool to see them do well. I hope that people won't take shortcuts in their scouting, but I don't have faith that will happen.
Yeah, I mean that's like, I really wish this was not the
Same.
like the biggest thing that bothers me is how this ends up being the subtext whenever you're talking about a player who happens to be an import. It's very disgusting, honestly. I just like, it's
really annoying.
Like if an import player does well, it is judgment that we pass on all import players. If an import player does poorly, it's judgment we pass on all import players. And it would be great if we could just assess players based on their individual performances. But because of the way the ecosystem works, and the way that ownership and scouts often operate, we can't do it. It sucks, guys. We need to take shortcuts so we can do less work. So we have to say that because Rahel and Luan have done well, and because Noah and Jun have done well, that every LEC team should just get a Korean ball lane and call it good. All right, sick. Let's. But anyway, TLDR, I'm glad they're doing well. I think part of it is because LEC have had more roster changes, like kind of per team. I haven't strictly done the math on this because LCS have had way fewer roster changes. Many LPL teams have barely changed. And obviously it's like almost kind of unfair to do it with LPL because the volume percentage, you have to go by volume percentage, and they have so few teams, and so a lot of teams will just run it back. But they have done, I think this is like one of the only splits where LEC has had more roster changes than LCS, between spring and summer at least. And I think that partly is part of the reason why we are seeing so many games just kind of default to like spring resolutions, whereas we're all going to go mid and smash our faces against each other and see what happens, right? I think that's been a big part of it. It's just finding the coordination. So the fact that you have like a player like Niski, and then their top side, I think, is doing a lot of heavy lifting in terms of just like setting space for fights. And the fact that they've come together and been able to execute fights so well is part of the reason why SK is like currently in the top 3. It's why Fnatic's currently in the top 3. It's why BDS is currently in the top 3. Is like they do have like very good front to back ability to play from that perspective. Why is my phone ringing? Be right back. Anyway, if you have a comment on that, go ahead. 1 second.
The only other thing I'll follow up, because I was trying in my mind to go through roster changes while Kelsey answers her phone. But I think the other point about topside is really important, because even in their last series, I believe, against MDK, or not their last series, the last game against MDK, the one that I was just referencing. I'm pretty sure it started with irrelevant play on topside, and then Isma also going topside and getting another kill, if I'm remembering that game correctly. So
I'm sure you were. I just came back, so
it's also nice to call it their topside, because again, I think when we previously saw them do like okay, and then the team quote unquote collapse in playoffs, irrelevant was still kind of the standout in those games, to the point where we were talking about how his name actually comes from top lane is irrelevant, because he would do super, super well on things like Rumble, and then his team would still lose. So I'm pretty sure that started with Skarner plays on topside, and I hope games aren't merging together for me, because I haven't actually had time to go back and VOD review LEC like I would usually, because we had meetings all day yesterday for LCS because of the shortened week. So usually Monday is my like LEC VOD review, because when we go in for LCS days, a lot of my like prep and makeup, and then in this case, pre-taping the lounge waiting room, eats into time where I could be watching LEC live. So yeah.
And I not for nothing, but I think like you were commenting on irrelevant. I didn't hear exactly the play that you're talking about, but because I had to go hang up on a telemarketer. Awesome.
Nice. I was pretty sure. Actually, let me just check, because I can probably just check.
Yeah, but
I probably just check drafts just to make sure I'm right.
Since you're mentioning irrelevant, I think not for nothing, but he is one of the better performing top laners this split. I don't know if this is controversial. I don't know if this is a controversial take or not. Let me think. He's like top. He's probably like top 2 for me, right? At the moment. I don't know if that's a crazy take or not, because I haven't been paying attention to LEC live, so I haven't seen like the takes or anything like that on social media like I normally would, but consistently I'm like, wow, Irrelevant's actually doing a lot in terms of this fight or the situation, and like he's very rarely in a position where his lane's not pushed out, so he can't rotate, so his timers on sidelines are not bad either. We have a very low bar for like good side laning in LEC at the moment, but like he's able to keep pressure, and part of that is because he does like play the Gnar, he plays the Renekton, and I think they get a lot out of the fact that he'll be like the Skarner. They'll get a lot out of the fact that he has like a winning side lane, so that they can get priority on initiating a lot of their fights, and that's like part of what makes the engages from Lawn work out. So yeah, I actually have Irrelevant really highly at the moment, so yeah.
Game I was thinking about. Now I'm looking at draft. He solo killed Merwin on Skarner, and then Isma was able to actually path up a little bit later, and then they got another kill on topside. So it's just like topside actually set up a lot of that game, and then obviously I feel like people are gonna look, because we were talking about Rahel and Luan. I thought the engage in the MDK base was really funny, obviously, since I already brought it up. But then I feel like everyone's talking about the Rahel
versus Supa play.
The Rahel Supa duel that Rahel won.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That was unfortunately not Supa's finest moment. He did not play that well. But anyway, because I remember like someone, because I hadn't watched the games yet, because I usually sleep during LEC, so I watched them the next day, and so someone said, "What did you think of like Rahel's insane outplay today, Kelsey?" And I was like, "What?" And then they said, "Look at this clip," and I opened it. And I was like, "But that's just super inting, no?" And then everyone laughed. It was like she doesn't know, she doesn't know the context, like that kind of thing. But
oh god,
that was an unfortunate play for sure. Yeah, which is a nice transition point because the next topic that we have on the docket is revisiting MDK and KC because they've been
KC.
For all three splits, they've been kind of like a hot button topic, right? So you had Mad performing extremely well in winter, and then you've had KC kind of consistently going 2-7, but they've won 3 games, Emily. It's crazy.
Won 3 games God. Now. Want to hear a funny thing about KC that goes on now? I don't know if you know, but Raz is the biggest closer.
Oh, I know. Oh, I know. Yes.
Yeah, you are aware of this. Okay. Because and I love closer. This is like no shade to closer. It's just that closer would have some like plays where his last year where his team was inting him, like his team is like inting the hell out of him actually. And then he would also have some plays where he is not performing well. And Raz would just be like, nope, not closer's fault. And so every time, for whatever reason, KC is like usually the last game, I feel.
Yeah.
Which is the time where we get to watch it, especially since this week we pre-recorded Waiting Room. So we kind of get to watch some of it as a group. Again, like I haven't reviewed the final KC game, but I just remember like closer did not make a good play and Raz was not in the room. We're all looking around. We're like, where's Raz? Like we need him to defend this play. But then he ended up making a good play later and Raz is in the room. And I was just like, man, Raz's closer's good luck charm, apparently. But I think I just want to bring that up in regards to KC. I'll start with MDK because obviously it's been no secret about how much I like this team for similar reasons that I like 100 Thieves in terms of there being
Pog
and Nongshim, yeah. Or just like any org that decides to look at a lot of Academy of Challenger players and kind of brings them up. It can go with a veteran usually. It can go either really well or really poorly. Obviously for MDK, it went shockingly well in the first split. And I remember we were talking at that time about how, like, at least in my opinion, this was a little bit ahead of schedule for what I had expected of them, but also how much of it was going to be that teams hadn't necessarily come together enough to potentially punish a lot of their mistakes. And now they're really struggling.
Yeah.
And it's sad because there were points in time, especially with the composition they had, which I remember was a brand comp, right? Let me look up. So I'm not.
They have played brand comps.
Yeah. It was a brand. It was Top's Edge, and they gave up the Skarner. Brand, Corky, Trist, Trade. They took the Corky, and then Zeri, Leona.
Mm-hmm.
And it's another thing where on this team, despite the fact that Elioya can obviously be a carry jungler, I remember him being able to affect lanes a bit earlier always works out well for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also think in this game, the big difference maker really was topside. And like, again, obviously everyone remembers the Rahel Supa solo kill, but I actually think that a lot of it was irrelevant on topside, getting Skarner. And I don't know if a subtopic to this is like the answers that people are coming up with for Skarner when they do let this champ through, because he's still like absolutely incredibly strong. And just really punishing. And then for Carmine Core, they also got Skarner. Oh, and this was the Rel Skarner combo where Targamas actually did get off a really good Rel engage at one point in the game, if I remember correctly. Because I again, unfortunately haven't been able to review this game and have not seen all of it. But I remember Vitality being in positions to win this game.
Yeah, they were.
And then in team fights.
Like
more than a few times.
Yeah, I mean the big thing for me is, so like I guess going back to the closer, we're talking about Vitality MDK or KC MDK, because KC Vitality, because KC Vitality was the most recent one. We're talking about MDK.
Yeah, I'm talking about KC Vitality. Was the one where I wanted Raz in the room for.
Okay, because we were talking, because we started to. I'm okay.
No, I'm all over the place.
I think we were talking about Yoya, right? Yoya, and then yeah. So I guess I'll start with my Mad Lions thesis, because I've have set this up so that we can transition into KC for reasons that Emily is aware of, and chat will find out. But the TLDR for me on MDK is they were succeeding very well off of strong bot laning phase and top getting like nice counter picks, and Elyoya being like very good at reading his lane states. We have transitioned into a situation where now you are playing for jungle. And when people say playing for jungle, like people said that MDK are good at playing for jungle, that Elyoya is the star, but they're much, I always phrase it as they're good at communicating between their lanes and their jungle, and their jungle is good at reading lane states. So for me, that's more of like a Yanko style jungler, where you're going to operate very functionally well off of your lane states, and carry doing that. Like Elyoya is a big Vi player. He does these things very well, but now you're in a position where you want your lanes to play for your jungler. And I think that that's like a little bit harder, especially if you're going from knowing that Elyoya is the experienced member of the team, so it's a lot easier for him to play for his lanes than for his lanes to like understand what the jungle wants to do, you know? So that's one thing that I think is trickier for them. The other thing that I think is trickier for them is that they were never good team fighters, and now we're consistently seeing the top lane meta be like Cassante, Gragas, Skarner, like these types of, we're gonna play, like, we're gonna take space, we're going to frontline, the things that I was just like praising Irrelevant for. And the only good team fighting that I've seen MDK like really execute all split is like kind of open space kiting team fighting, where they can kite back and drag the fight so that it turns into a pick style skirmish. But when it's like a strict front to back over a neutral, where enemy team has like a super farmed jungle, or they're playing with like a more experienced top laner at taking space, or an AD carry who like kites better, or anything of those things, they're not playing as well. Like I think their strengths are very much map state, and I went back to like okay, LEC is basically just all about team fighting right now. I think part of the reason why I thought LEC looked good in winter was unironically MDK doing well, because MDK gave them diversity and different ways to play the game, right? So it was like G2 and MDK who are not playing these like strict front to back style comps, but right now it feels like G2 can't even win strictly playing through map advantages inside and mid game. They're still mostly winning through team fights. Like most teams are mostly winning through team fights. So I don't know if that's an issue of macro and NARAM is just the best way to play the game, or or if it's just an issue of right now teams are like trying to reconvene and get back into the swing of things, and a lot of games are being won by, like, I would say the Fnatic style in the context of LEC is almost dominant, because you're engaging on mid over and over, and you're just like running straight mid. And that's what Fnatic were good at, is just like finding creative timers to drop sidewaves and then force mid. But now that's just like the dominant way to play in LEC at the moment. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting spot, because it's like, I think both like MDK and G2 have suffered for it. And MDK, I think, spent a lot of time in spring. It felt like trying to actively play team fights and get better at team fights, and it didn't work for them. and now they're not very good at anything. So yeah. Anyway, that was a very long rant about MDK. Any thoughts on Mad before we transition fully and talk about KC a bit?
I mean, I fully agree with the Elioya jungle style point, which I think is the biggest thing. Again, like a lot of teams have had really large difficulties. We're going to talk about another one in a minute of KT Rolster, but of transitioning from like the AP carry jungle style, because it's different even than
the way that you would play, too, like, right?
Yeah. Even the way that you would play like an AD carry style jungler with an AP mid, right? So, and I think Elioya, obviously they've tried him on the Sedge, they've tried him on the Ivern, stuff that like you can get creative pathing and try to like play around your lanes. And I believe they lost those games as well, because then when it does come down to team fighting, like you said, they're not executing as well as other LEC teams. But yeah, you can see them like, I guess, kind of like scrambling to try to find their footing in this meta.
It's really telling that the one game they won was Vitalia, right? And that's like, when I think of Elioya, I think of Vi. He's had Vi banned against him. Let me actually check this. So this is spring playoffs. But like spring playoffs, it was consistently banned against him. It was banned against him by like both games before the Heretics game that they won with Vi. Then it was banned in the game immediately after as well. And it was picked away from them in the Giants game. It was banned against them by Fnatic, banned against them by SK, and picked away from them by Giants game. So literally the one game where they could play Vi is the one game they won. So yeah, it's definitely kind of a telling read on how they're used to playing, like what they're used to playing, and how their inability to kind of find something that works as well as these kind of like pick style drafts. So it's interesting. I think they can try something like I think the Zyra attempt was maybe a good look, because Zyra can play this like pick style with like the Zyra TF comp, and it's just unfortunately they tried that against G2. But I think they can go back to trying more stuff like that, and maybe it's just not working for them in scrims, so they dropped it and are trying to play very simple front to back comps. But I kind of would like to see them play a little bit more of the style they were playing in Winter. Again on stage, just to see if it works out for them. So, but for KC, since we were talking about the closer fandom,
Raz,
yeah, the Raz closer fandom. I will say, because we brought this up before, that 100 Thieves, one of the biggest struggles was I don't think closer and double lift really saw the game the same way. I think that was like one of the biggest problems that the team had. And that led to both of them looking bad in different circumstances. So it feels like, at least with KC, he has maybe not he might have like a similar situation going with it might be like a very similar situation going with the AD carry, because I would argue that Upset also very much plays for like the fight scenario. 80 bot scales, even if we gank bot, 80 bot scales. But I think at least like he seems to be playing well with like Kana, for example. I think they're often on the same page, which is really good. And Vladdy has also impressed me. Like we talked a little bit about Vladdy before, so I think that their top side again is like performing pretty well, even if the team itself is kind of fragmented in what they want to do.
Because it has been interesting to see, again, just because he was such a bot-focused jungler, but when he was successful, he was a bot-focused jungler in a world where you are diving on really specific bot wave timers. Like you're basically setting up that dive, you're going in. It's very different than sitting back, playing safe and farming, and playing more for lane and minion push than to like dive and kill your opponents and set up these like way before the whole teleport changes. It was Someday also TPing down to dive bot like fully. And when that changed on last year's 100 Thieves, I think it was odd to see Closer maybe not try to go topside as much. And obviously, Someday in earlier on in his career was kind of even when he was getting jungle attention, it would be in a way where you weren't successively diving top, right? Like you weren't smashing it. You were essentially ganking him once, setting him up in his lane, and then he would be like, okay, I'm fine. And obviously you have experience like playing with Someday, and I know there were rumors about how they wanted to get Someday and they wanted to get Abadage and kind of try to recreate that top side. But in terms of playing around Kana, I think Kana, for better or for worse, can make a lot more like aggressive / reckless plays when he's trying to play for the wave on top side. And that actually could be, again, I'd have to review the beginning of this game because I didn't see it because we were pre-recording something. But
really, like, I wouldn't say this game was like a huge early slam dunk win, right?
Okay.
The Vic game. But I mean, he did like
Photon made plays on top side, right?
Yeah.
With Lincess.
Yeah, I'm gonna fucking mispronounce this shit. I'm still gonna call him.
I know. I'm just like I'm trying. Yeah. I try to mimic what the
because Closer, if I recall correctly, he pathed down and they were playing for like Vision bot side pretty well, but that's normal KC game states, right? Yeah. And then Vit had a counter play at top where they ganked, if I remember correctly. But they were actually in a position where it felt like Vit would, from my perspective, I thought Vit would win the game until they got to like a dragon skirmish. Also, not for nothing, like a lot of the things I said about, or was it? No, it was Grubs. Grubs and Rift is when it started turning. But the unfortunate element of it is that I think like you can say I almost think of Closer as like a poor man's Elyoya, given what I just said. In a lot of ways, where he really does play that skirmish style, and I don't think he reads like the jungle, the lane states as well as Elyoya does, but he is like always down to scrap, you know. So, and he also has like he will like kind of drag the team along with the way he wants to play though. So I think that he does have that advantage because KC, if nothing else, they were struggling with finding a unifying move. So I think maybe you can call that an advantage that they have. I know it was a dragon fight actually. Yes. Okay. Like I'm flipping through the VODs right now. My brain is dead. By the way, you know why KC games are the last game every day, right?
They're popular?
Yeah, because it's optimized for viewership.
Yeah.
They're always going to be the last game of every day because that's when viewership will peak. But yeah, it was like the 16-minute Drake fight. It looked like Vitality would win. They turned, and then I think like basically KC were able to find picks off of that. But man, like I don't know. This team is so crazy. It's actually very coin flip. I think they have a lot of the same problems they had last split. So yes, they did win one more game, but the question is like adding the extra salaries to the roster, do we feel like that was worth it? And I guess they could still technically make a deep run and win the entire split and go to Worlds, but At this point, I would say it was probably not worth it. So I'm curious to hear your take on the KC, on where KC are ending up.
Barring like an insane miracle run, in that regard, I don't think it's worth it. But worth it in terms of looking at Vladdy against LEC competition. Like we already talked about, I think for me at least, he's been the standout on this roster in terms of players I am looking forward to seeing like how they develop in the future. I think he's performed at the very least, and again, this is on me because I was not able to watch him in ERLs, but I thought he has performed well against his LEC competition in a way that makes me again excited to see more from him. I think he's been the best performer on the roster, and if you are looking at it from that perspective, provided that they don't use this as an excuse to be like, well, this team didn't work out, so we're going to, send him back down or get rid of him, which I hope doesn't happen. If you're just looking at this as like, okay, we're still Khalees waiting room and Vladdy had a good like individual performance, that added like experience against better competition in LEC could end up being really good for him as a like LEC mid lane prospect, if that makes sense. In terms of like looking at the org doing well enough to go to Worlds, I mean, KC fans can come back and roast us if they somehow manage to do it, but right now, based on their performance, I don't see it.
Yeah, because I'm looking at the let's see, contract end dates. With the exception of Closer and Targamas, the contract end dates are all this year. I can't hear
More
you.
Vladdy,
sorry.
though.
What's up?
Oh no, I was gonna say hello. I was gonna say we'll see what happens. I would like to see more of Vladdy though, because I think he's performed really well.
So I think that's like from that perspective, it's a very weird roster. Like we added Kana and Close. We added Kana to the roster. We brought Vladdy up, and maybe they're literally bringing Vladdy up because this is the last split they have with him on contract, right? So maybe there's a chance it's like, okay, we want to see him in LEC while we have the chance. But if that's the case, I feel like you might be better off keeping him in academy and then hoping he gets less eyes on him, just because that's how it works. Anyway,
I was gonna say that's the opposite of what I was saying.
Yeah.
But especially since he has performed really well. I mean, but then I guess it's like
good for his career, right? So if
it's good for his career.
Agree that he's playing well, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Vladdy, looking forward to seeing more from you.
Yeah.
Is where I'm at.
I also think that like we say this Khalees waiting room, and I think Khalees will improve their team fighting, but I also am not thinking that he's gonna like suddenly make this team a top contender, assuming they keep every other piece, right? That's like the biggest issue for me. So, I guess we'll see. Maybe we won't see. Maybe Khalees will look at this and say like, yeah, I'm not touching that. GG. My stonks are up. I'm gonna join some other team like Fnatic or something. Who knows? Fun times. But yeah, I just think like for me it's just very funny to look at the contract end dates and be like, all right, you have Closer and Targamas for 2025, and we just signed all of these guys on one split contracts basically. Banger. From that perspective, you can maybe reason that they were cheap contracts because like obviously Kana, Closer, none of them had jobs in tier 1 leagues, right? So it's from that perspective, maybe they're like, all right, it's worth like the little bit of spend to maybe improve our chances and to see what we have with these pieces. But at the same time, it's just a very interesting roster decision that I don't fully understand, and would be cool if we ever heard an explanation, but doubt we will get one. So anyway, since I know you don't have a lot of time and we haven't even talked about LCS, which is crazy, but I don't know. We'll have a lot of time to
skip over the KT topic.
Yeah, we got to get the KT
no,
topic.
They're terrible.
All right, my chat would like to know, since we just talked about KC, whether KC or KT would win in a best of 5.
God.
And I think it's just because this framing the topic like this will hurt you. So yeah,
it does hurt me. Especially given like, I don't know how many of your viewers saw KT's last performance, but it was like really bad. Like really, really, really bad. Like we just like so if you are looking at, oh, how is this roster supposed to work, right? Like, what is the impetus behind this roster? Okay, we're relying on pre-existing synergy of Pioshik, Deft, and Beryl, who've all played together, who are all like at least friendly. I'm pretty sure Pioshik and Deft are actually like really close, and I'm also pretty sure that Deft specifically wanted to play with Beryl. So you're trying to bring back that DRX 2022 magic. But the big difference, and I promise it's going to be a meta thing and not a DRX were actually awful, which is also part of it. But like they were really bad at the beginning of that tournament, by the way. And Pioshik was splitting time with Juhan. But the big difference maker that in that tournament that happened, in addition to just, you know, the miracle runs, the meta shifts, what Deft and Beryl were playing in the bot lane, specifically bringing the Ashe Heimer to the table, was that Zeka, who is now on HLE, the team that absolutely owned KT this past week. One of the teams that absolutely owned KT this past week, actually. Zeka's mid lane champ pool came into meta, right? Like he was able to play Akali, he was able to play Sylas, and he was able to play Azir. And I think the meta right now, if we're looking at KT's current mid laner in BDD, he is, interestingly enough, based on what he's known for as a player, which I don't know how you feel about BDD, but for me, his strengths have always been on something like Azir, on something like Talia, his ability to kind of push up on those champions and then affect side lanes. And you would expect him to play very similarly on some of these AD mid picks, but he has not looked good on them at all. They have not looked good in the AP jungle AD mid meta. Pioshik in particular has looked really lost. He has been getting owned by his jungle competition a lot of the time. Peanut played Fiddlesticks against him and won. Which was
it's a banger.
Really fun. Yeah, it was a banger. The Fiddlesticks, the Fiddlesticks Ashe, what was it? It was Skarner, Fiddlesticks, Zeka on Yone, and then Ashe Alistar. It was a fun time. I mean, not for KT fans, but it was a fun time for HLE fans or fans of Fiddlesticks. They also, so like the team itself, I think, has not looked at all comfortable in the current meta. To that point, they also keep letting Skarner through to their opponents without like Perfect, who you could make an argument has maybe been the best individual performer right now on the team. He did not look good in either of his matchups as Cassante or Renekton. And again, you're looking at like what this team is built on, which is like pre-existing synergy, and then bringing in and then having BDD be like the stable push out mid, go affect sides, come up with like insane shuffles or Talia, Flicks, and Fights. And then Perfect, who you're bringing up from your academy system or your challenger system. And this team was like kind of functioning in spring, but they are not functioning at all together now. Like they just look completely lost in terms of what they want to do on the map. And then additionally, they just look completely lost in terms of not only what they're drafting and what they're giving up, but also like how they're playing. And it's really frustrating as a KT fan. But also not like, I'm not going to say like unexpected, but like if you look at the problems of this roster, it's not a shock, if that makes any sense. Like it's not a shock that this team is not doing well in this meta, and it's also not a shock that relying on the 2022 DRX magic and synergy between these three players is also not going to work out, right? Because there's a reason why it was such a massive story. And the reason is because
it was huge.
People were very afraid DRX wouldn't even make it out of play-ins.
Yeah.
Right? Like that was actually a thing. So I mean, as a KT fan, I'm obviously sad. I also am not shocked that this roster is struggling this much. In terms of if current KT faced current KC, I mean, I'm still gonna go with KT, I guess.
The bold prediction.
I know, it's a very bold prediction.
Isn't it normal for KT fans to say they'll lose, though?
Yeah, that's true. So maybe they would lose now because I just cursed them. You know?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
They let Kana have Skarner, and then it's over.
It is actually interesting. I think it's.
It makes me sad that you made me do this.
Oh, no. It is actually worth pointing out that you could argue they have similar problems. Like, okay, we're going for like if Closer is a poor man's Elyoya, then is Pioshik a poor man's Closer?
God.
It's funny because, like, I would say other than his kindred, right? Generally, Pioshik's playstyle is similar in the sense that he very much like does play for the skirmishes that happen, like these types of ideas. And when you mentioned the BDD point, which I fully agree with, because I remember so many games throughout BDD's history, he's like even just has Stockholm syndrome, where it's like if I have lane prio, I'm just gonna TP bot and think that they're gonna get dove. You know, it's just like years and years of playing,
I don't trust my bot lane.
Playing with shit ball lanes. But I'm looking at the like the midline matchups of their games, because you mentioned it, and I was like, it's a good point. And it's like, of the picks, he's basically had 2 matchups that I would say strictly get prio in all of the games that they've played. And one of those is the game they won against DK.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah. Or I guess like 3, because Corki versus Yone, he'll strictly get prio until first crash, and then he'll lose. And then Jace, Talia, like you have to play it very volatile, but I think you can, and I think he did. But and then you have the Talia versus Corki that they lost.
Mm-hmm.
But those are basically the 3 games. Otherwise, they've been playing like Corki, Yone, Vigar was a choice.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's just not necessarily within his wheelhouse to play like this. And then yeah, I don't know. There's a lot going on.
Oh, yeah. It's also like so the BDD point is the one that sticks the most to me, just because when his team's been good, he has been such a huge part of it, right? Like, being able to affect sides. And that's not happening now.
Yeah.
It also helps out his jungler. Pioshik is I fully agree with you. I think when he looked the best on TL was when he was making a play, one of his laners like had a good wave or good situation to do so. He's recognizing that and like syncing up with them, right? Like even when APA would like mess up something, it felt like, even though I know they weren't really communicating, because they did not speak the same language, and APA has talked about how like the whole team would like talk in Korean and then occasionally tell him what to do. But like it seemed like they were on the same page in terms of like a lot of those setups or like side lane plays that they would make together, right? Like to make picks. And yeah, that is not happening on this team. And I also think Deft and Barrel, again, if you're looking at that pre-existing synergy and like how those bot lanes worked, not that Deft can't play these champions and not that Barrel can't play engaged supports, but that like it definitely does not seem like their preferred way of play at this point in their careers, and or the last time that they were looking insanely good, it was on these ridiculous pushing bot lanes, right? So yeah, even though they've had like, I'm thinking back to spring and they've had good individual performances. Even Beryl had like an insane Alistar performance for like one game. It just, the entire team has not seemed comfortable playing with each other recently. And part of that is drafting, part of that is meta. Part of it is probably once things start to fall apart, you tend to have internal discussions about why that is. So I assume they're 0-4 now, and they've been absolutely destroyed in their past two series. I doubt the vibes are good. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
Which can make it a lot harder to fix things too. So that could also be a point in KC's favor, right? They're coming off of a game win.
So what you're saying is that KC have the momentum, right? So clearly.
Let's move on. I have 10 minutes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because we don't have much time left. We have like a few LCS topics. I'll let you pick the one that we talk about.
I kind of want to know what chat wants to do. Is it Big Dig Summer? I assume is what most people would want us to talk about.
I think the only LCS request I got so far was to ask for some Shopify Rebellion cope, but we can ask in the chat. What do you want us to talk about? If
Shopify Rebellion cope.
Shopify Rebellion cope. I've actually gotten a lot of questions about Shopify Rebellion lately. And I think I have to do an actual like an actual deep dive on them is kind of my feeling, because there's a lot. Like the Shopify Rebellion cope is that their drafts are bad. So you know, if they fix their drafts, they can win. They can win LCS. Sure, that's the cope. There you go.
Their draft is just unlucky right now.
Looks like
what do we think about C9? We can talk about C9.
A couple of C9 questions, yeah. Does C9 macro look better, or is it just top div? I don't think neither. It's top div. I would say neither.
Yeah.
Is there a third neither option?
I mean, I think with C9 in their games against IMT, they looked just a lot more well coordinated. And I also think just generally Blabber, we've been talking about how this meta has like boomed certain teams. I think this is a great meta for Blabber, guys. He is living his best life. He loves this kind of like heavy farm style. I think he is more than happy to play things like the Karthus, right? Especially if his lanes are getting prio. I think it's interesting because they've been a team that hasn't necessarily had a huge Senna prio, but they occasionally come out with some really strong Senna games. Like last split, I remember going up against FlyQuest. they had the Nidalee Renekton combo on top side, which everyone was just like, but then they ended up playing it out really well. And then in this game against IMT, they had the kind of Exodia Senna comp with the Karthus, which was really good. But I also think, like, generally the biggest difference I've seen for C9, it hasn't made a massive difference, but it's been a slight difference, has been that Blabber is either pathing through or playing around mid slightly more. And him and JoJo, in my opinion, I don't know if Kelsey disagrees with this because it's not by a massive amount, but I think him and JoJo have worked better together as a unit in the games that I've seen from them this split, as opposed to last split, where it felt like everyone on the team was kind of just doing their own thing. And if they got ahead through laning, they would win. I still think to some extent that is the way that they win games.
True,
yeah. But I also think that Blabber and JoJo have looked more synergistic in their series this split than last split. And I don't know if that's just because, again, it's a really good jungle meta for Blabber, so naturally he's just going to be a lot more comfortable. Again, not saying he can't play Maokai and Sejuani, but I think if you ask him what kind of meta he would be in, and it involves power farming and efficient farming, he's really efficient at fast clearing farming junglers. So I think that is a big difference maker for C9. For Thanatos, he's been fine. I don't think it has been top diff at all for C9, though, in my opinion.
Yeah, I still think, like, with Thanatos and JoJo in mid game, you're still gonna end up in the same situation where there's not necessarily coordination around how side lanes are playing. We've already seen some hints of that, particularly in the Dig series. Obviously, the IMT series was. Anyway, the
that game one was like it was a really difficult game for me to cast, again, as a fledgling caster, because you get to the point where there's so many ways that you can say, like, this game is over, bro. Like, they just won a 4v5. So yeah.
Yeah, I think is there a jungler who enjoys playing Sedge? Good question. Unironically, I have met a couple in my time. Shout out to Kryra, who, will eventually come up to the LCS if he ever gets an opportunity to play NACL. Anyway, I guess for me, like, the only thing we haven't mentioned is part of the reason, because the broadcast loves talking about the gold lead at 15 minutes or 10 minutes stat.
15.
It's 15. Yeah, I assumed it's 15, but 10, it's probably the same. Like, roughly the same. But the reason why I think they've had slightly better mid games is not necessarily because their macros improved, but because Vulcan is finding a lot more angles in this meta to take fights from, like, in like retake scenarios, right? So with, like, the Nautilus, with the Leona, things like that. So for me, it's so weird because I know a lot of people feel like technically there are more games being played, but it feels like less games just because we've only seen 2 matchups per team. In terms of, like, how they're playing out, whereas normally we would have seen 4 in just 1 game each. But it also means that variance is going to be lower, so in terms of, like, who is actually winning the series, I would say that even without any roster change or any change in anything they're doing, I would expect C9 to beat both Dig and IMT. With the way they were before. That said, I do agree with you that mid jungle looks better and support meta is, like, a lot better for them as well. So I think that that's, like, where we're mostly seeing the strong performances come from, but I would have expected them to kind of do well in both of these series in spring as well. That said, they did lose to IMT, so in spring, so that's worth pointing out.
Part of the reason why they could just look better, like I said, and kind of supporting your point, is that I think it's just a more comfortable meta for Vulcan and Blabber. Like, Blabber is super, super comfortable on these junglers. Vulcan, I know that... Why does it keep thinking I'm doing a thumbs up? I'm counting on my fingers, Discord. I know that people always take whenever you say like X support is better at the style of support, people always take it as you're saying that they can say. It's like, no, that's what I'm saying. But I am saying that Vulcan's knowledge of roam time is typically very, and if you can get ahead by doing that, aka gank it as Nautilus, your mid lane up for success, you have complete mid prio, go to bot, and you're absolutely fine. You are, I believe at that point, was the farming Nautilus in a Senna lane. It was really great, right? Like, I think 9, even if they haven't necessarily made a ton of macro improvements, are just playing in a meta that suits 2 of their players specifically a lot better.
I think that's definitely like just general trample comfort. You don't have to dig as deep, right? That's the biggest thing. Like JoJo will play Tristana, Yone, like all those champs like all day, all year long, all day long. He's even whipped out the Azir still, right? So like it's super comfortable. Obviously the meta is super comfortable for Blabber. The meta is super comfortable for Vulcan. So just that factor alone will make their drafts a lot more flexible and make it a lot easier for them to execute the games, even if they're playing. It's just like they're just individual comfort, right? So I'm expected to see. I'm very interested to see them against TL because I think they'll lose to TL for the similar reasons that they lost to TL in playoffs. So, but we'll see. That might. Are they playing this week? Because we might have to wait for that for a while.
They are not.
Okay, so yeah,
I think,
we'll talk about this again in the future. They're playing Shopify. So again, we're not going to have like a lot of the aforementioned Shopify point, a lot of data.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we have to wrap, right? So
I have to go work out.
All right. Have a good time. But before we go, remember exclamation like the coffee link came up in the chat. I will have this VOD out again before the end of the night. So you'll get early access to the VOD. The support means a lot. We appreciate it. We're basically 50% to our goal of unlocking Twitch VODs. So who knows?
What the? Okay.
The hearts are great. Emily will do more hearts if you become a coffee member or something.
True.
Yes.
I never know what is going to actually make it work.
Yeah, but thanks everyone, and we will see you probably still next week because League of Legends will still happen. So good times. All right.